Across the backroads of America, there are places the headlights never quite reach. Lonely stretches of highway where the fog hangs low, the trees lean in, and something waits just beyond the guardrails. Every region has its own creature whispered about in truck stops and midnight diners. The Ozark howler in the mountains, the Lizardman in the swamps, the Skinwalker on desert roads, and the Goatman lurking near abandoned bridges. People call them legends. But drivers swear they've seen eyes glaring from the ditches and shapes crossing the pavement long after midnight. Some say they're myths, but what if they aren't? Tonight we explore 4 real backroad creature encounters, stories of deserted highways, isolated cabins, and desolate stretches of night where something steps out of the darkness when you least expect it. In the end, you'll have to decide if you believe. Welcome to Whispers After Dark, where shadows speak and the night listens. Before we begin, take a moment to like, subscribe, tap the notification bell, and leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. And if you've ever seen something strange along a dark road or lonely trail, tell us your story. Now settle in, let the storm roll across the asphalt and drift into sleep as we begin 4 terrifying creature encounters in the back roads of America. Tonight's creature encounters begin with the Ozark howler, a story known in these hills for its deep guttural screams and glowing eyes that follow travelers through the timber. This one is called Screams in Devil's Hollow. I didn't believe the stories about Devil's Hollow until the night I was driving home from work, long before my cousin ever sat in the truck with me. It was late, close to midnight, and the road was completely empty. Just the hum of the tires and the faint smell of rain drifting through the cracked window. The fog was already settling over the gravel, rolling low across the ground in soft, pale waves. I rounded one of the sharper bends, and the headlights swept across the edge of the tree line. That's when something moved. Just a flicker, a dark shape that darted across the road and into the brush. I slammed the brakes, the truck fishtailing slightly on the damp gravel. My heart hammered in my ears as the headlights steadied. Something stood just inside the beam of light. Not fully visible, just the outline of a hunched shape, tall and broad, with what looked like the curve of a horn catching the light before it slipped deeper into the trees. There was no sound, no rustle, no snapping branches, just the dense silence settling around the truck like a heavy blanket. I rolled the window up and locked the doors without realizing I'd done it. For a moment, I thought about getting out to look, but a cold ripple crawled down my spine, and every instinct I had screamed no. Whatever I saw didn't move like a deer, and it didn't sound like a bear. It was too big, too smooth, too quiet. I drove away fast and didn't talk about it. Not to my family, not to my friends, not even to myself. But a part of me knew that whatever lived in Devil's Hollow had seen me first. A week later, my cousin rode with me coming home from a party. The air that night felt heavy, damp with the smell of wet leaves and cold rock. Fog hugged the ground in thick patches that curled up around the truck tires like pale fingers. Even with the windows rolled up, I could smell the deep woods, pine sap, wet earth, and something else underneath. Something wild and musky that didn't belong near any road. The wind had died completely. Not a single branch moved as we eased down the narrow path. We joked at first to keep ourselves calm, talking about old family stories and the black cat with horns that people claim to see in these woods. But as we moved deeper into the hollow, even our laughter sounded strange, too loud, swallowed by the dark instead of carried by it. The forest was too quiet, no crickets, no owls, no rustle of animals in the underbrush, just the hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. Then the smell changed. It hit us both at once, a thick, sour odor, like wet fur left to rot and something metallic underneath, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. My cousin rolled down his window an inch, then slammed it shut immediately. The air outside felt colder than the night should have been, icy enough that frost crept along the inside of the glass where his breath hit it. We rounded a curve, and that's when we saw the eyes. Two glowing red orbs hovered low to the ground at first, then rose higher, like something standing up from a crouch. They weren't the reflective shine of a deer or raccoon. These were lit from within, burning, pulsing slowly, like embers stirred in a dying fire. They blinked once, then again, and then they vanished behind a cluster of pines before either of us could say a word. My cousin hissed, "Go, just go." His voice was tight, strangled, almost shaking. I pressed the accelerator, but the truck sputtered like it was choking on the air. The engine coughed twice, then steadied, but the smell grew stronger. Wet fur, blood, and something like sulfur. The headlights flickered, dimmed, then brightened again as the forest closed in around us. That was when we heard it. The scream tore through the trees like something ripping open the night. It wasn't a mountain lion. I've heard those. This sound was deeper, rougher. It vibrated in my ribs and made the steering wheel tremble under my hands. It was the kind of sound that didn't just echo, it chased you. Another scream followed, closer this time, moving through the forest with impossible speed. Branches snapped. Something large crashed through the brush to our left. The truck shook as if something heavy hit the ground beside us. I kept my eyes on the road, knuckles white on the wheel, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might bruise my ribs from the inside. Then the silhouette appeared in the headlights. It stepped into the road not 20 feet ahead. Tall, broad, its thick fur matted dark with moisture. Curved horns rose from its head like the twisted branches of an old oak. Its shoulders were massive, hunched, its breath rolling in white clouds across the gravel. The red eyes glowed bright as blood under the high beams, and for a split second, those eyes locked onto mine. Time froze. My breath stopped. The world narrowed to those two burning points in the fog. My cousin screamed my name. I swerved. The creature lunged toward the truck, its claws scraping the metal with a shriek that set my teeth on edge. The impact rocked us sideways. Gravel spit from the tires as I slammed the accelerator. The howler let out another guttural roar that rattled the windows and shook the mirrors. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just drove until the fog thinned and the trees opened wide enough for the sky to reappear overhead. When we finally reached the main road, the smell faded. The air felt warm again. The night insects returned as if nothing had happened at all. We pulled over under the first streetlight we saw. My cousin stepped out, knees shaking, and pointed at the side of the truck. Deep claw marks, 4 of them, raked across the door, metal peeled back like it had been sliced with a blade. We never drove through Devil's Hollow again. And even now, when the night grows too quiet and the air turns cold for no reason, I swear I can hear that scream in the back of my memory, waiting for me to take the wrong turn at the wrong hour, on the wrong back road, where something ancient still watches from the trees. Tonight's creature encounters continue with one of the South's most disturbing legends. This is the Lizardman, the road through Scape or Swamp. Scape or Swamp was always at its worst after midnight, when the night air grew heavy enough to drag across the skin and the water along the ditches lay flat and dark as oil. Through the summers, people joked about the stories, laughed about claw marks on old car doors, and teased each other about the swamp monster. But anyone who'd driven through the swamp after dark knew the difference between a joke and a warning. There was a stillness there, a listening kind of quiet that settled over the road like a weight. The night it happened, the sky was low and swollen with a storm that hadn't broken yet, holding a pressure that made the air vibrate behind the ears. The humidity felt dense enough to chew. The swamp smell seeped through the vents, rotting reeds and algae mixed with something metallic underneath. fog drifted along the asphalt in slow patches, creeping closer with each mile until the headlights sliced through nothing but gray. The deeper the road wound, the quieter it became. The insects fell silent. The frogs stopped calling. Even the wind died against the tree line. It felt like entering a sealed room where something had been waiting long before the truck arrived. The fog wrapped around the tires and crawled along the hood like it recognized an intruder. Halfway through the swamp stretch, something moved across the road. It was fast, faster than any deer, and the shape didn't match anything natural. A tall form, angled forward, slick with water, limbs bending wrong against the glow of the headlights. It vanished into the reeds on the other side with a splash that echoed across the stillness, leaving ripples spreading out into the dark. The smell changed then, thick, sour, stagnant. The kind of stench that clings to the back of the throat like rotting vegetation dredged in the bottom of unmoving water. Fog rolled aside as something large shifted through the reeds. The grass leaned, dipped, then sprang back as if pushed from below. The night seemed to pull inward as a shadow rose slowly from the marsh. A long silhouette glistening with swamp water, ribs expanding with slow, deliberate breaths. The outline came into focus when it stepped into the lights. Scaled skin glimmering wetly, arms too long, ending in dark, curved claws that dripped mud and algae. A head shaped like something reptilian, with ridges along the skull and eyes that reflected a deep, unnatural red. It stood upright at first, then hunched forward as if adjusting to the world above water. In the silence, the only sound was the soft dripping of swamp water falling from its hands onto the asphalt. The creature moved closer. Each step left a wet slap on the pavement. Fog curled around its legs as if rising to greet it. The air inside the cab grew colder, squeezing the lungs with each breath. The truck felt too small, too thin, too exposed. When the creature reached the hood, it dragged one claw across the metal. The sound vibrated through the frame, a long, low screech of steel being peeled back under steady, unhurried pressure. The entire truck trembled. Something primal stirred in the bones, an instinct older than thought, urging flight. The truck lurched forward when the accelerator slammed down, but the creature did not fall behind. Its shadow moved in and out of the fog, keeping pace along the passenger side, sometimes upright, sometimes dropping to all fours like something built for water, not land. The fog swallowed it, then revealed it again, running with a smoothness that didn't belong to anything human. A heavy impact struck the roof, rocking the vehicle against the slick road. Claws scraped across the metal, carving gouges that vibrated through the seats. The weight shifted slowly from one side to the other, as if the creature were searching for a weak spot. The swamp smell filled the cab, thick and wet, as though the creature were breathing directly against the glass. Only when the road finally widened and the swamp began to recede did the presence lift. The fog thinned. The air warmed. The night insects returned in a sudden, jarring chorus that felt too loud, too alive. Something slid off the roof with a dull thud, swallowed immediately by the darkness behind. Under the bright lights of the next gas station, the truth revealed itself in the metal. Deep claw marks raked across the hood and doors. Thick, green slime clung to the roof in streaks, smelling strongly of algae and stagnant water. The dents along the top curved inward in the shape of long limbs bracing their weight. Nothing followed us home that night, but the swamp didn't let go. Sometimes, on humid evenings when fog gathers low across the ditches, that same sour, fetid smell drifts through the vents, no matter where I drive. And whenever it does, I remember the way the creature looked when it stepped out of the reeds, dripping with black water, like something the swamp created, protected, and would one day send back out onto that road again. Our creature encounters continue with one of the most feared beings in Navajo legend. This is the Skinwalker, night on Painted Mesa. There are parts of the desert that look empty on a map, long stretches of scrubland and broken rock where no houses stand for miles. But those who live out there know the truth. The desert is never empty. Every shadow has weight, every silence has a pulse, and sometimes the land itself feels like it's listening. I learned that on a night when I should have trusted every instinct I had, long before the road narrowed to a ribbon of cracked asphalt and the sky turned the color of dying embers behind painted mesa. I had spent the week helping an old coworker move into a remote cabin on a forgotten stretch of desert land. The kind of place people choose when they want distance, real distance from the world. He'd taken a caretaker job for an off-grid property, a simple cabin with peeling paint, an unreliable generator, and a yard buried under years of blown sand. We hauled in supplies, scrubbed out rooms, repaired what we could, and set up a small solar array to keep the place livable. By the last evening, the air smelled like dusty sagebrush and cooling sand, a kind of dry scent that sticks to your clothes and makes your skin itch. The heat still clung to the rocks, radiating back into the cooling air, while a faint wind drifted through the gullies, carrying the whisper of distant coyotes. The cabin sat at the base of a shallow rise, its windows facing the open desert. At night, the world beyond the porch dissolved into a black expanse broken only by the pale glow of starlight. It was quiet enough that each shift of settling wood felt too loud, too sharp, echoing through the emptiness around it. The first night passed without incident, though something about the land felt wrong, like stepping into a room someone had just left. On the second night, the silence deepened, not just quiet, but empty. The coyotes stopped calling. The owls fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold itself still. The air turned cold enough that frost gathered on the edge of the porch boards. I could feel the weight of that quiet pressing against the cabin walls, as though something outside was listening for movement. Just after midnight, something moved behind the cabin. Not footsteps, more like a slow drag through sand, heavy and deliberate. The sound paused at the corner of the cabin near the bedroom window. The faintest breath of cold air slipped through the seams of the wall, carrying the scent of burnt hair and dry musk. A shadow passed across the sliver of moonlight that cut under the doorframe, too tall to be any coyote, too smooth in its movement to be human. I lay still in the dark, listening. The boards on the far side of the porch creaked under a shifting weight. A long scrape followed, as though claws had dragged slowly across weathered wood. No animal in the desert moved with that kind of patience. When dawn finally bled across the horizon, the desert felt normal again, but prints circled the cabin, deep impressions in the sand, long and narrow, with heel marks that looked disturbingly close to human but bent wrong in subtle, impossible ways. My coworker brushed it off, insisting the desert played tricks at night. But the feeling that something had been watching us from the edge of the dark lingered like grit on the skin. The next night was worse. The air grew colder after sunset, carrying the scent of iron and dust. The cabin's timbers tightened and the temperature dropped, popping sharply in the stillness. When the last light drained behind the mesa, something moved out in the sagebrush, pacing, slow, measured, always just outside the range of the lantern glow. The brush didn't rustle like it should have. Instead, it parted with that same soft drag, as if something with great weight slid between the branches without breaking them. When I finally left the cabin on the final morning, heading home alone with the sky turning pale and the land feeling strangely hollowed out, I had the sense that I was being followed, quietly, distantly, by something patient enough to wait for me to return to the empty stretch of road. And Painted Mesa waited with it. The road into the desert always felt uneasy after dark. The headlights reached only a few feet ahead before the darkness swallowed their glow, revealing flashes of pale limestone and twisted juniper branches clawing outward like skeletal fingers. The sky above was a wide wash of deep blue and violet, the first stars barely visible through the haze rising off the mesa. Even the insects seemed hesitant, their calls thin and scattered across the silence. As the miles slipped by, the wind grew colder, carrying a scent I didn't recognize at first, a strange mix of burnt hair, iron, and dry animal musk. The smell clung to the back of my throat, thick and metallic, and for a moment I thought something under the hood was overheating. But the truck ran smooth, too smooth. The engine hummed evenly, but the air around the cab felt heavier, pressing in with a quiet expectation. That was when I saw the shape moving along the ridge. At first it looked like a coyote running parallel to the road, its silhouette flashing in and out of the beams as the truck curved through the canyon. But the longer I watched, the more wrong the movements looked. The limbs bent sharply in ways that strained the joints. The back arched too high, too long. And every few seconds the creature straightened, rising on two legs before dropping back to all fours with a jolt that sent dust scattering from the rocks. The smell intensified. That mix of iron and burnt fur seeped into the air vents like the creature itself was breathing against the dash. A low thrum of dread rolled through my chest, the kind that grows from the spine outward, warning that something is watching, something old, something hateful. When the road straightened near the base of Painted Mesa, the creature vanished from the ridge. The stars above brightened, revealing the flat stretch of desert ahead, pale and open under the moon. The relief lasted only a moment. Something shifted in the sagebrush on the right side of the road, the plants bending as though something huge was moving between them. The wind died completely. The truck grew colder. I eased forward, eyes scanning the darkness. The sage parted in a sudden, violent motion, like something massive had pushed through with little effort. A shape emerged into the beam of the headlights, rising slowly onto two legs. It was tall, far taller than any animal that belonged in the desert. Matted fur clung to its limbs in rough, tangled patches. The chest looked stretched and distorted, ribs jutting sharply beneath skin that didn't seem made to cover a human frame. Its head was all wrong, elongated, too narrow, like a coyote skull twisted and reshaped into something that could mimic a human outline but never quite get it right. The creature stood motionless in the road, its breath drifting in steaming wisps despite the cooling desert air. Its eyes reflected pale yellow, not like an animal's shine, but like something both aware and angry. Every instinct screamed to stop, but the thought of being still, being quiet, felt worse than moving. The engine idled in a low hum, the vibrations trembling through the steering wheel into my hands. As I crept forward, the creature rotated its head, not turning its shoulders, not shifting its weight, just rotating the skull with a slow, unnatural twist until it seemed to stare directly into the cab. The smell of burnt hair filled the truck thick enough to sting the eyes. The desert grew oppressively silent, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Then the creature moved. It didn't run. It didn't leap. It simply shifted into the darkness on the left side of the road, melting into the shadows with a speed that felt impossible. The sagebrush rattled once, then nothing. The headlights illuminated empty ground, pale dust, and distant stone. For a moment I wondered if I imagined it, if exhaustion and desert heat had twisted shadows into monsters. But the desert answered the question. Something heavy hit the tailgate, slamming the truck forward with enough force to jolt my teeth together. Claws dragged across the metal, scraping long, uneven grooves through the paint. The back of the truck dipped as though something had climbed onto it. The roof sagged under a sudden weight, the metal creaking as the creature shifted above me, each movement deliberate and predatory. A low vibration rolled through the frame, a sound halfway between a growl and a rasping exhalation. The smell of burnt fur poured down through the vents again, colder now, sharper. The creature moved slowly, dragging its weight across the roof, testing the metal beneath its limbs. The desert outside stayed silent. No wind, no insects, no distant coyotes. Just the scraping of claws and the metallic groan of a truck that felt far too thin. When the road finally climbed out of the canyon and the lights of the highway appeared in the distance, the weight lifted. The pressure eased. The air warmed as if whatever had been riding the truck had slipped off without a sound. The desert came alive again in small, cautious ways. A faint chirp of an insect, the whisper of a breeze against the sage. I didn't stop until I reached a brightly lit gas station an hour away. In the harsh fluorescent glow, the truth stretched across the metal. Deep, jagged scratches raked across the tailgate, the roof, and the sides. Marks too wide and too uneven for any animal. Patches of singed fur clung to the grooves, brittle and blackened at the tips, smelling faintly of burnt hair and something older underneath. Sometimes when I pass Painted Mesa and the wind shifts just right, that same metallic scent returns, burnt fur and iron carried on the air as though the desert remembers. And every time I wonder if something still watches from the ridges, waiting for another lone traveler to follow that road after midnight. Tonight's creature encounters concludes with one of the most strange beings whispered about across backwoods towns and lonely rural crossings. This is the Goatman, the bridge at Crooked Creek. There's a certain kind of darkness that clings to old county roads, darkness that feels older than the pavement, older than the farms carved out of the pines, older than the families who've lived here for generations. Crooked Creek Road carried that darkness like a shadow draped over the land. The bridge at its center was the worst of it, a warped stretch of rusted beams and rotting planks where people whispered the Goatman still walked after midnight. They said he wasn't a legend so much as a presence, something with the weight of an animal, the shape of a man, and the patience of a predator that knew the woods better than anyone alive. Livestock vanished near that bridge. Travelers heard footsteps behind their cars. A few swore they saw horns rising from the fog. Most shrugged it off as folklore exaggerated by fear. I did too, until the night the stories stopped feeling like stories and something real stepped out of the dark. It was early fall, the kind of cool night where a mist rises off the creek and hangs low across the road like a pale sheet. The pines were dense that evening, the branches gathering overhead until the sky disappeared into a lattice of black shapes. The air smelled like damp leaves and cold metal from the toolbox rattling in the back of the truck. The mist drifted across the headlights in slow, curling ribbons, and every so often the scent of stagnant creek water ghosted through the vents. Heavy, earthy, and faintly sour. Nothing felt wrong at first. The road was empty, just the steady hum of the engine and the occasional flash of a raccoon's eyes before it vanished into the brush. But as I rounded one of the sharper bends, the mist thickened into a wall. The truck pushed into it as though breaking the surface of deep water. The world shrank to only the few feet illuminated by the headlights. Everything beyond them dissolved into shifting silhouettes. Branches, trunks, and something else moving deeper between them that I told myself was only imagination. The bridge appeared suddenly, half hidden beneath the fog. I slowed as the planks creaked under the tires, the sound rising into the beams overhead. Halfway across, the truck shuddered, a soft, stalling cough that rolled beneath the hood. The engine sputtered again, then died. The lights flickered once before surrendering to the darkness. I sat there in the middle of the bridge, surrounded by fog so dense it swallowed the railings. The air grew colder once the engine cut, and the smell of stagnant water drifted through the cab like something exhaling from beneath the boards. The woods were silent, deep, unnatural silence, the kind that makes the skin tighten across your arms without knowing why. Something moved in the mist. At first it was only a shape, a tall shadow shifting at the far end of the bridge, too large for a deer, too deliberate for a person. The fog curled upward around it, clinging to its outline, as if recognizing whatever stood there. Then came the sound, slow, heavy breathing, drawn out like something huge was tasting the air. The breath thickened the fog into faint white pulses drifting toward the truck. The boards behind me creaked. One step, then another, slow, heavy, deliberate. The bridge vibrated faintly with each footfall. The planks bowed, flexing under a weight far greater than any person. The air inside the cab thinned as though the creature itself pulled the warmth out of it. I locked the doors and rolled the windows up with shaking hands, but even with the glass sealed, I could hear it breathing, deep, wet, animal breaths almost pressed against the metal. The fog behind the truck thickened, swirling upward in slow columns. Then something brushed the rear bumper, a faint scrape, a shift in weight. The truck rocked gently, almost like someone testing it or leaning against it. The metal groaned as something dragged its claws along the side panel, slow, long strokes that peeled thin curls of paint from the door. The roof dipped under a sudden weight, just one heavy, settling shift, as if something enormous had crouched on top of the cab. The metal creaked above my head. I stayed frozen in the driver's seat, unable to look up, listening as the creature dragged its weight from one side of the roof to the other. The smell of wet fur seeped through the vents, thick and musky, drowning the interior in its presence. I stayed in that truck until dawn. No sleep, no movement, just the creature's slow pacing, the fog pressing against the windows, and the sense that something was studying the truck and deciding whether to peel its way inside. Only when the sun warmed the mist enough to thin it did the weight lift. Footsteps retreated across the planks, then silence. A friend arrived hours later with a spare battery. In the daylight, the damage made everything real. The hood dipped inward where something heavy had knelt or leaned. Deep claw marks raked across the driver's door. The metal was peeled and curled, not cut, evidence of a strength far beyond anything natural. Mud and coarse black hair clung to the edges of the scratches, smelling faintly of creek water and wet animal musk. We towed the truck out of the hollow, but the memory stayed lodged under my skin. Because whatever damaged that truck wasn't just curious. It was testing boundaries, testing access, testing me. I hoped that was the end. But a few nights later, I was wrong. With my truck out of commission and in the repair shop, my friend let me drive his old work truck. It was the next week. Driving home from a job, I found myself on the same dirt road and with the same wood plank bridge. I felt the shift before I saw it. The sudden drop in air temperature, the silence falling over the woods like a held breath, the faint vibration through the steering wheel as the wind died completely. I didn't inch along that bridge. I focused on the other side and shot across it like the devil himself were after me. When my tires hit the dirt road again, fog rolled from the creek again, rising in pale curls, and something moved along the tree line. Not running, following, keeping pace. A tall silhouette among the pines, stepping in a smooth, unnatural rhythm that made the branches dip. The mist parted once as the shape crossed a gap between trees. I saw long, jointed limbs, patches of coarse fur, and a faint glint of two curved horns rising above it. The creature's head tilted slightly as though listening to the engine's hum. The air filled with the same sour, musky scent as the night before. Wet fur mixed with the metallic tang of creek water and something old that clung behind the teeth. The creature did not approach the road. It didn't need to. It simply kept pace through the woods, matching the truck's speed for nearly a mile before melting into the fog and leaving the night eerily empty once more. Why I ended up on the same road 3 nights later, I will never know. But there I was. And that night left me with no doubt at what was stalking me on the lonely stretch of road. The fog gathered thicker than before, swirling in heavy clouds across the bridge planks. As the truck crept across, the boards under the tires vibrated with the weight of something moving behind me. Heavy steps pressing into the planks, closer and closer with each stride. The smell intensified. The air thickened. Even the mist seemed to recoil as a tall shape emerged within the headlight's reach. The creature's outline rose from the fog ahead, massive, horned, its torso covered in matted fur clinging in dark, dripping patches. The head was elongated, the horns curving forward like hooked blades. Its breath came out in slow, steaming plumes that curled upward. Fog clung to its legs like something rising from the creek bed itself. Behind me, the planks groaned again, multiple steps this time. Something else moved on the bridge. Then another. The air felt crowded, thick with unseen shapes pacing through the fog. The creature ahead stood motionless, blocking the road, its eyes reflecting a pale, sickly light from deep within the shadows of its skull. Something brushed the back of the truck, one slow, heavy drag of claws across the metal. That was the moment instinct took over. In that moment, I realized there was more than one of this thing. The thing people in that area called the Goatman. The tires howled against the boards as the truck shot forward. The creature ahead shifted, its outline blurring as it lunged sideways into the fog, vanishing as the truck burst off the end of the bridge and out of the hollow. The woods pulled back, the fog thinned, the air warmed with sudden, startling normalcy. I didn't stop driving until I reached town. Under the harsh parking lot lights, the truth shone across the metal. The bumper was bent inward, deep gouges raked across the tailgate as though something had gripped it with clawed hands. For weeks afterward, the memory clung to me like the fog in that hollow, those slow footsteps behind the truck, the outline rising from the mist with horns like crescent blades, and the sense of multiple shapes lingering just out of sight. And sometimes, on cold nights when fog gathers low across the creek beds, I still hear the faint creak of planks under a heavy step, as if something is searching for the truck it almost caught. Fact or fiction, every listener has to decide that for themselves. These legends that stretch across America and across the world didn't appear out of nowhere. Somewhere, sometime, someone saw something they couldn't explain. Maybe they're just old tall tales passed down around campfires. But then again, how did the stories begin? What did people witness in the dark that made these creatures part of our folklore? Are these encounters echoes of something real, or are they shadows shaped by the imagination? We'll leave it to you to decide whether tonight's stories were truth or dreams whispered into the quiet hours of the night. If you enjoy unsettling tales, gothic fiction, strange encounters, and scary stories that make you question what you believe, then Whispers After Dark is your place to live. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling us which story kept you awake the longest. For now, we'll leave you with the sound of the rain to lull you towards sleep. And as always, stay curious, stay cautious, and beware of the whispers after dark.